Jack was a young pilot who always dreamed of leaving Earth behind and reaching the far edge of the stars. He grew up near the ocean, and he would sit at night staring at the waves and then at the sky above, and he would imagine the sky was another sea waiting for him to sail across. When he joined the space fleet, he thought his dream had come true. He was chosen to serve on a ship that carried brave men and women who wanted to seek new worlds. Jack felt proud and ready, but inside he carried fear. He had never told anyone that fear, not even Claire. Claire was a medic on the same ship. She had gentle hands and a strong will. She cared for everyone on board. She was known for her calm voice when storms came. She was the one who stood strong. Jack loved her more than he loved the stars themselves. They met during training, and since then they were never apart together. They promised to face whatever the universe held for them. They believed that nothing could tear them apart. Their love was a bond that grew stronger each day. When the ship left Earth, the crew was filled with joy. They laughed, they sang songs, they believed they would return with stories and glory. Jack sat by Claire during the first nights in space, watched her as she worked with the crew. He told her that he would always protect her, and she smiled at him and told him that she would always keep him safe. To those words stayed in his heart and gave him courage. Weeks passed, and the ship went further and further into space. Stars filled the windows every night. Some men grew quiet, some women prayed for strength, but Jack and Claire held on to each other and to hope. Then one day something went wrong. The ship lost its signal back to Earth. The map showed nothing around them. The crew gathered in fear. They realized they were lost. No star matched the charts, and no guide could point the way home. Silence filled the ship like a shadow that would not leave. Jack felt the fear rise inside him, but he stood tall. He walked to Claire and held her hand. He told her that they must not give in to fear. She looked into his eyes and nodded. She said that as long as they were together, they had a reason to live. Her words lifted him, and he carried that light to the others. He spoke to the crew. He told them that they must fight for each day and for each other. Said that no matter how far they had gone, they still had their hearts and their strength. Life on the lost ship was not easy. Supplies began to grow short. Water was counted, food was shared in small parts. The engines were weak and power faded. At times the lights would dim, and the sound of the ship would grow quiet. Men whispered of death, women cried in the dark. Yet in the center of it all, Jack and Claire stood side by side. They worked with others, they gave courage where there was none, they shared hope where only despair was found. One night, Jack walked through the hull of the ship. The stars shone outside like cold fire. He thought of Earth, he thought of the ocean, he thought of his home. But more than that, he thought of Claire. He knew that love was his anchor. He would not let fear take him. He would not let despair win. He promised himself that he would guide her and the crew no matter the cost. Claire, too, carried heavy weight. She healed the wounded when accidents came. She held the hands of those who were sick. She wiped tears of the young and the old. She gave her strength to all around her. Yet when she was alone, she cried softly. She feared for Jack. She feared for the ship. She feared for all lives drifting in the dark. But when Jack came to her side, she smiled again, and she found the strength to go on. Together, they faced each day, one step at a time. Together, they lit a flame that would not die in the hearts of the crew while space stretched endless around them. While silence pressed heavy on every soul, Jack and Claire held each other and carried love through the dark. Their journey had only begun, and the test of their courage and sacrifice still waited ahead. Days passed into weeks, and the crew felt the weight of being lost in the endless sky. No one could tell which way was home. The maps were useless, the stars gave no path. The captain tried to give orders, but doubt grew stronger each day. Men argued, women cried, silence filled the halls. Jack walked among them and saw fear in every eye. He knew they were close to breaking. He knew the ship would not survive if hope was gone. Jack stayed close to Claire. She gave him strength when his own spirit grew weak. She never stopped working. She healed the sick. She comforted the tired. She shared her food with those who had none. Her smile gave others reason to keep moving, even when her heart carried fear. Jack often watched her when she walked through the sick bay. He thought that she was the true light of the ship. She was the reason he could stand before the crew with courage. Nights in the ship grew darker as power failed, lights flickered, and sounds of the engines faded. Men gathered in groups, whispering about death and failure. Women prayed to see Earth again. Some wanted to give up. But Jack stood tall. he told them that they must not surrender to despair. He reminded them that they were human, and humans were strong. He said they had come too far to lose hope. Now he said that if they stood together, they could survive the dark and find a way back. Some believed him, others only listened in silence. Yet, Claire was always there beside him. She held his hand, and her presence gave him power. When he spoke, he felt her heart beat steady with his own. He knew that as long as she walked beside him, he could never fall. One night, he sat with her in the mess hall. The food was little more than crumbs, yet he looked at her and saw only beauty. He told her that he would never let her suffer. She looked at him with quiet eyes and said that she would never let him be alone. The days turned harder. Food was cut again. Water was measured by drops. The engines stopped more than once, leaving them floating. In silence, the sound of fear filled the halls, louder than any machine yet. In the middle of this darkness, a strange kind of strength began to grow. The crew started to look at Jack and Claire, not only as friends, but as a guide. They saw how the two never gave up. They saw how love carried them through each trial, and they began to believe that they too could endure. One night, while the ship drifted without light, Jack walked through the control deck. He could see only stars outside the glass, endless and cold. He felt the weight of fear pressing down on him. Then he heard soft steps. Behind him, it was Claire. She placed her hand on his shoulder. She told him that no matter where they went, no matter what they faced, she would walk with him. He turned to her and saw tears in her eyes, but also fire. He held her close and whispered that together they could face anything, even the endless dark. The crew watched them, and slowly their despair began to fade. One man shared his last piece of bread with another woman, gave her blanket to a child. People started to care for one another again. It was as if the love between Jack and Claire spread like a fire through cold hearts, even in hunger and pain. They found ways to live on together. They built small bonds of trust and hope, and the ship felt alive again. Yet the danger never left. One morning, the captain warned that fuel was almost gone. Engines could fail at any time. If they failed, the ship would be trapped forever. The words struck the crew like a hammer. Fear rose once more. Voices shouted and hearts grew heavy. Jack stood before them again. He spoke with a firm voice. He said that if they gave up, they would surely die. But if they stood strong and trusted one another, they might yet find a way. He told them that love was the greatest weapon against despair, and that no star was darker than the light in their hearts. When he finished, Claire stood beside him and held his hand. Together, they faced the crew. Together, they gave hope. Together, they reminded all that no matter how lost they were still alive, and as long as they were alive, they still had a chance. The crew looked at them and found strength again. They fell silent, not in despair, but in quiet belief. The journey was far from over, but the flame of hope had returned, and it burned brighter than the fear of the endless night.
The ship drifted for many more weeks, and the crew felt both hope and fear each day. They had found strength in each other, but the shadow of despair never fully left. One night, a faint signal reached the broken radio. It was weak, almost gone, but it was enough to wake the crew from silence. They gathered in the control deck and listened. A world far ahead gave out a faint pulse of life. It was not clear what waited there, but it was the only chance. They had joy filled the crew for the first time in many weeks. Voices lifted and eyes shone with new fire. They dreamed of land of water, of green fields. They dreamed of air that was not held inside a machine. Jack watched them and felt hope rise in his own chest. He turned to Claire and saw her smile. It was the first true smile he had seen from her since Earth. He held her close and whispered that they might have a future. After all, she nodded and whispered that she believed in him. But the path to that world was not easy. The captain warned that fuel was almost gone. Engines strained. Every hour, power was fading with each passing day. There was little chance the ship could reach the world without great risk. Someone would need to go outside and repair the main reactors. Without that work, the ship would never make it. Jack stepped forward before anyone else could speak. He said he would lead. The repair, his voice steady, his eyes clear. He knew the danger, but he felt no fear for himself, only for Claire. Claire begged him not to go. She held his hands, and her eyes filled with tears. She told him that she could not lose him. Not after all they had faced, not after all the nights they had kept each other strong. But Jack smiled at her. He told her that love was not only about holding on, it was also about giving when the moment came. He told her that if he had to give his life, so she And the crew could live then. His love would not be in vain, she cried softly, but she knew he spoke the truth. She held him close and whispered that she would wait for him to come back. No matter how long when the day came, Jack gathered a small team of men to join him. They suited up and stepped into the freezing dark outside the ship. The silence of space pressed on them like a heavy stone stars, stretched forever, above and below. But Jack felt calm. He thought of Claire. He thought of her voice, her touch, her smile, and that gave him courage. He moved across the broken metal, leading the others with firm steps. Every wire burned, every plate frozen, every movement filled with danger! Inside the ship, Claire worked in the infirmary, her hands shaking as she tried to stay busy. She treated cuts and burns from other men. She whispered words of strength to those afraid. But her heart was only with Jack. Every sound of the ship made her jump. Every message over the radio made her hold her breath. She prayed that he would come back to her safe. Yet deep inside, she feared what fate might demand. The repair mission grew harder than any had expected parts were. Shattered wires, sparked men, cried out in pain. As cold and fire struck them, Jack guided them through every step. He told them not to give up. He told them to think of the world ahead. He told them to think of the families they carried in their hearts. He worked with bleeding hands, his body heavy with strain, but he did not stop. Not once. He knew the life of every soul inside the ship rested on this task. Claire heard his voice through the radio, his tone steady even when pain cut through it. She closed her eyes and held back tears. She told herself that he would return to her. She believed in him with all her heart. She believed that no dark could silence the fire in him. She moved among the crew, lifting spirits as he lifted wires outside together without touching. They carried the weight of every soul on board. After long hours, the team reached the final stage. The main switch had to be pulled to restart the engines. But the power surge would be deadly for the wolf. Who stayed near, Jack told the men to return inside. He told them their lives mattered and that their duty was done. They begged him to come back, but he shook his head. He said he could not ask another man to bear the cost with calm hands. He reached for the final switch and pulled it down inside the ship lights. Best alive, the engines roared for the first time in weeks. The ship shook but moved again. The crew cried out in joy. They looked at one another with tears and laughter. Claire stood frozen, waiting for his voice over the radio, waiting for the sound that never came. Her heart broke, yet she stood tall. She whispered his name, softly, as if he could hear her through the endless night. She knew the ship would live. But the price had been carved deep into her soul.
The ship moved again through the stars, the engines alive with new power. The crew shouted with joy. Tears ran down their faces for the first time in many weeks. They felt the touch of hope, yet in the middle of the cheers, Claire stood silent. She knew the price that had been paid. She knew Jack had given his life, so the others could live. She felt both pride and pain. Heavy in her chest, she walked to the infirmary and began her work. Again, she treated the sick, she cared for the weak, but her thoughts never left him. Nights passed and she would sit near the window staring out into the endless sky. She whispered his name softly. When no one could hear, she remembered his smile, his promise, his steady hand. She told herself that he still walked with her in spirit, that his love had not ended with the silence. Outside, she carried him in every step and every breath. She took men and women around her, found strength in her, even when they did not know her sorrow. They saw her stand tall. They saw her never fall, and that gave them courage to keep moving. The ship pushed closer to the distant world. The signal grew stronger each day. The captain told them that soon they would reach land. The crew began to prepare. They dreamed of soil under their feet, of fresh air, filling their lungs, of water that ran free in rivers. They spoke of building homes. They spoke of children playing under a bright sun. Each dream carried the memory of Jack, even if his name was not spoken aloud. They all knew their lives had been saved by his hand. Claire felt the weight of that truth more than any other. She walked among the crew and gave them hope. She worked until her hands shook. She smiled until her cheeks ached. She gave her last piece of food to a boy who had none. She wrapped her blanket around a woman who was cold yet in the quiet of the night. When no one saw, she pressed her hands to her heart and wept for the man she had lost. She wished for one more moment to see him, one more word to hear his voice. But the stars gave no answer. One evening the ship shook with sudden force. Alarms rang. Men ran through the halls. The engines strained under the push of the final journey. Panic spread. Fear returned with sharp claws. Voices cried out. Claire rushed to the control deck. She saw the captain shouting orders. She saw crew running in chaos. The world was near, but the engines burned too. Hot wires snapped. Flames burst across the lower decks. The ship could fail before they reached their new home. Claire remembered Jack in that moment. She remembered his words. About courage, she remembered how he faced the dark. Without fear, she raised her voice and called for calm. She told the crew that they must not give in, that they had come too far to lose. Now her voice rang strong over the sound of fire and fear. Men and women stopped and listened. They saw her face, they saw the fire in her eyes, and they felt their strength. Returned together, they rushed to fight the flames together. They worked the controls together. They pulled the ship back from the edge of ruin. The storm passed and silence returned once more. The ship still moved, though broken and battered. Claire stood among the crew, her heart heavy, but her spirit strong. She knew Jack had not left her. She felt him in that moment. She felt his courage moving through her hands, his love guiding her words. She knew that even though he was gone, his sacrifice lived on inside her, and inside every soul on the ship. Days later, the new world came into view. It was blue and green, shining in the light of a golden sun. The crew gathered at the windows. With tears in their eyes, they had survived. They had reached the promise that had carried them through endless nights. They sang, they laughed, they embraced. One another, but Claire stood apart, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She whispered his name again. She told him that they had made it. She told him that his gift had not been wasted. She told him that his love had carried them all. The ship prepared to land, the crew made ready for the unknown ground below. Claire worked without rest, helping each man and woman gather strength. She felt no fear for herself, only for the people who looked to her now. She would guide them as Jack once guided her. She would keep memory alive, not only in her heart, but in the life of every soul who walked on that new world. She knew her journey was not over. She knew love and sacrifice would forever walk beside her. The ship broke through the clouds of the new world, and the crew stared in awe. Wide rivers ran across the land. Mountains rose in the distance, and forests stretched far under a bright sun. The air was fresh, the soil rich. They had found a place to live at last. Men and women wept with joy. They embraced each other. They whispered thanks for the gift of life, yet every heart carried the memory of Jack, who had given his strength so they could see this day. Claire stood on the landing site as the hatch opened. She stepped onto the soil, her boots sinking into soft ground. She breathed in the air and felt it fill her chest with new fire, but her eyes grew wet. She whispered his name softly, knowing that without him, none of this would be real. She bent down and touched the earth, then raised her head to the sky. She told him in her heart that they had made it, that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The crew began their work. They built shelters, they gathered food, they drank from clear streams. In many months, children ran across the grass, men carried wood, women planted seeds. Together they built the beginning of a new life. Claire walked among them, helping where she could, her hands steady, her voice calm, yet she never forgot the man she loved. She told stories of him to those who asked. She spoke of his courage, smile, his strength. She wanted every child to grow up knowing his name. At the edge of the camp, Claire built a small stone by the shore of a wide river. She carried rocks with her own hands. She placed them one by one until the markers stood firm. She sat before it each night and whispered to it. As if he were beside her, she told him of the new home, of the progress of the crew, of the laughter of the people. She told him that he was not gone. He was alive in every step they took. She felt his presence in the wind, in the water, and the firelight of the camp. Days turned into weeks, and the settlement grew stronger. Fields of grain rose from the soil, walls of wood and stone guarded their homes. The people began to sing at night by the fire, their voices strong, their hearts brave. They spoke of the past, but looked to the future. Claire stood at the center of it all, guiding them with gentle strength. Her heart still broken, but her spirit unbroken. She had become the voice of hope as Jack once was. She carried his fire and spread it among the people. One evening, the crew gathered by the river. They lit a great fire and told stories of their journey. Men spoke of the silence of space. Women spoke of the fear they once felt. But above all, they spoke of Jack. They spoke of how he led them through the dark, how he gave his life to save them. Claire listened, her eyes filled with tears, yet her lips curved into a quiet smile. She rose and faced them. She told them that Jack had not died. He lived in their courage, lived in their love. He lived in the new world they now called home. The people bowed their heads and promised that they would never forget his name. They promised that his story would be told to every child, to every family, To every soul who walked this land, they promised that his sacrifice would never be lost in silence. It would be their song, their light, their shield forever. Claire felt her heart swell with pride. She knew he was with her. She knew he watched from beyond the stars, and she knew he was proud of them all. As the fire burned bright and the people sang Claire Walk to the River, she looked at the water flowing under the moon. She whispered again his name and promised that she would live not in sorrow, but in honor. She would carry his dream forward. She would heal the weak. She would guide the strong. She would raise the young. She would keep the fire of love alive for as long as she drew breath. The river carried her words away, and she felt peace for the first time since the silence took him. So the tale of Jack and Claire lived on. It became the foundation of their new life. It became the story told in every home. It became the heart of the people who had once been lost in the dark of space, but now walked under the light of a new sun. Love and sacrifice had carried them across the endless night and would guide them forever.